It's Monday, July 29th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, we are taking a university class of sorts, geography. And guess what? It's not about memorizing maps. It's about researching big concepts like what is the extent of human impact on Earth. Today, we're talking about why geography matters in the world. Stuck the landing, too, with the music and the reading of the text then. Great. So 300 geographers from across Canada are getting ready to descend on St. John's this August. And so the local department at Memorial University is getting ready, right? Because it's the Canadian Association of Geographers, their annual meeting. So the department, or someone with the department, got in touch with me and said, hey, do you want to do a show and talk about what geographers do and why geographic education matters? And I was like, of course. I love it when people get in touch and have other folks to kind of talk about things that they're passionate about. So that person, Professor Yolande Potty-Sherman, is here. How you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming in. So we got to introduce some other folks now, too. We got a full house here today. Plus, we're going to phone a couple of people. But I wanted first to talk to you about, what's the name of the course? Is it Geography 1050?
Yeah, it's called Geographies of Global Change. It's a really popular course at MUN. We have about 900 students, I think, taking it every year. And I went back, I was just curious, like how many people have taken this course in the last couple of decades. And 15,000 people in our community have taken introductory geography in the last 20 years.
That's a lot.
We have a really big reach, and it's really exciting.
15,000. So what do you think that means?
I think that a lot of people have been able to learn not only about maps and landscapes, which geography has always been about, but also really about complex processes of social and environmental change, which is really the focus of the course. So if you took the course in the 2000s, probably some of our listeners remember the Atlas quizzes that used to be a feature of the course. Mm-hmm. And I think the vast majority of students still come into the course thinking like, I'm going to have to memorize the capitals, I'm going to have to regurgitate that on a test, but that's really not what the course is about anymore. So in 2012, we did a big rebrand. I wasn't part of the department at the time, but a big rebrand of the course took place to emphasize geographies of global change and the idea that we're trying to understand how these big forces like capitalism, resource demand, globalization, climate change, demographic change, how all these forces are acting on our world. And so when students leave the course, they are taught to think about that and to kind of apply that in every context or every situation. And they're taught things like quantitative reasoning skills, critical reasoning, and those are some of the things we emphasize now rather than those Atlas quizzes.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the intro here. I'll go around the table and introduce folks. What I'll do is Ern Keing, geography prof, we'll start with yourself, and then we'll just kind of go, just explain a bit about who you are and what you teach with geography.
Sure. My name is Ern Keing, and I'm a geographer here. I've been in the department for 17 years now. Mm-hmm. Came here from the mainland, from Western Canada originally, and really this is such a vibrant and kind of dynamic department to have joined. It's the biggest geography department in Atlantic Canada. And it's a department full of, researchers working on a wide range of issues, including the ones that Yolande just mentioned, everything from climate change to cultural change and demographic change, urbanization, migration, et cetera. So where I fit in is on the resource development piece. My research focuses on mineral development and mining issues, particularly across northern Canada, but also globally, and thinking about that from a very geographical lens in the sense I think about the impact on landscapes and on communities, not merely just the extraction of minerals and their marketing as commodities, but how are those places transformed and changed by mining? And then when mining stops, how does that in turn transform and affect those places?
Yeah, and if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador today, these are some pretty important things to be looking into, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so resource geography is kind of one of those pillars, as Yolande mentioned, and we have a lot of folks looking at fisheries in the department, people that do research that's related to forestry, et cetera. But again, that's only scraping that that one kind of what's the metaphor I'm looking for here? That one
the surface, scraping the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go to Mahar Masudi. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks.
Good use of that button too, by the way.
Yes.
Tell folks about what you're researching and what you're teaching.
Sure. So I joined the department last year,
Yeah.
and so in my research, I focus on kind of like applying a really interdisciplinary framework to study cities and understand cities, focusing on studying and enhancing the environmental conditions in cities and consequently the health and well-being of people. For example, to understand how, for example, different alternative patterns of urban development can affect air pollution, temperature patterns, and let's say, what is the impact of those on health and well-being of people. And also, I contribute to teaching mainly to the geomatics courses, like, for example, GIS, remote sensing, and cartography. And also I apply kind of these knowledges and skills to understand and to study cities as well, like, for example, applying satellite images to different quantitative skills and methods and software to analyze these data from, like, about the cities.
All right, thank you for that.
No worries.
Carissa Brown, welcome back. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Re-explain what you do.
Re-explain.
Again, for those who don't
Changes all
remember.
the time. So I'm the biosphere part of the Department of Geography. So I'd call myself a biogeographer.
Okay.
I lead the Northern Edge Lab. And so we do a lot of research on how climate change and human actions and forest fires influence the distributions of plants and then the species that depend on those plants. So we are out a lot looking at rare species like black ash in the province. A master's student, Amy Frost-Wicks, is working on that now. We're looking at how can we choose populations of trees to grow that will be suited to the future climate of Newfoundland, really thinking about where species are now, why that is, and where they might be in the future.
So when I think of geography, is there something it's not? Because it seems like the range is the range is huge. If we from the whip around here, we're going to hear from some other folks in this hour, but it is just such a big range. Does that make it difficult to get the message across for why you should study geography, or is it just no? We've got such a big net, we can bring everyone in.
I think so maybe a bit of context. I did all of my degrees in biology. And I think there's a few people around the department who could tell you that they had degrees in history, in physics, things like that. I think an important message that we have as a department is that you're all geographers. You just don't know it yet. And so I kind of realized partway through my PhD that what I was doing was actually geography. And the people that I was looking to as mentors and the other research I was reading, that was coming out of geography departments. And so I slowly came to the realization that, hey, I'm a geographer, and the things that I am now learning and doing in a geography department have made my research a lot more relevant to people, a lot more interdisciplinary. I can lean on, have conversations with such a diverse set of colleagues in the hallway.
Yeah, I think back to my experience as an undergrad. I liked studying science. I wanted to study biology, but I also wanted to do political science. And that's how I kind of found my way to geography, because, someone was like, hey, we're going on a field trip and we're going to go to this marsh and we're going to look at where the species are and make a little plot. Carissa's nodding, right? She teaches a course like that. And I was totally hooked on this. Right, I was like, I can learn that, and I don't have to choose. Right, I can be where the meeting of these disciplinary boundaries is, which is really geography, the ability to bridge the gap between the physical sciences and the social sciences. And I think we've been talking a lot about how we think outside, right? As geographers, we're thinking beyond disciplinary boundaries. And we're also thinking outside in the literal sense, in that we are out getting outside. We focus a lot on those practical hands-on experiences that are really necessary, right, for creating a sustainable future.
So then what is it when we say geographic awareness? What does that mean nowadays? Because the old, from before my intro at the beginning of this show, right, at the start, my old self, way back before noon today, would think geographic awareness, it's about maps or charts, as I used to say when I was in the Navy. Used paper ones too, by the way. So I am that
Good
old.
skill.
Right? Not bad. Hey, triangulation, little fixing and navigating ships. that was a certain type of awareness, but yet we're saying, hey, we're not forcing you to memorize maps anymore and capitals. It is, but like it's still important for people to know this stuff, though, right? Like, if you should be able to look on a map and be like, that is the Atlantic Ocean. Not everyone can do that.
Sure, but I think one of the things that we emphasize in our geographical education now, because we can look all these things up, right? We all carry supercomputers in our pockets now, and we don't necessarily have that same reliance on charts, et cetera, but the ability to use and understand spatial information, which is what Mahar is helping teach all of our undergraduates by thinking about, we've got more spatial data and spatial information, and it permeates everything we do now. Every time we open up a web browser, every time we look at our phone and try and get location information, every time we think about how to get from A to B or book some flight somewhere, et cetera. So you can look up the facts about those places, but understanding how to understand, interpret, and make relevant that information, that's where geographical awareness and that kind of synthetic thinking that Carissa and Yolande were referring to is important. Back to your earlier point about what geography is or its reputation is versus maybe what it actually does. It is one of the challenges, and it's one of the challenges we face because there is a little bit of this slightly hidebound, version of geography that is, it's about maps or old maps, et cetera, and places and capitals. And in fact, we did a survey a couple of years ago. Over 20 geography departments in Canada have changed their names in the last 15 or 20 years or so to update, to try and get over that perception. So you see departments that are geography and geomatics, geography and environment, urban planning and geography, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't partly because we haven't come to a consensus about what that new name would be, but also because we do in many ways try to hold on to that sense that geography is what geographers do, and that we share a whole bunch of insights that aren't necessarily easily narrowed down to a specific application or a specific, if you say geography and environment, well, does that mean you only study the environment? What if you study culture? What if you study urban spaces? What if you do these other things? So I know ands are not necessarily something that limits, but it creates that perception. So yeah, we're constantly having to market ourselves in that sense.
It reminds me of, we've done a few shows with social workers, right? And a big part of the show was just like a lot of folks, myself included, really didn't know the range of what social workers did for a scope of practice, right? Including counseling and where, like, across the province in so many different positions. So like it's another group that's really trying to say, hey, there's more than perhaps what you might think, and here's some of what it is. The 300 geographers coming in. What happens when 300 geographers come to town? And it's the Shania Twain weekend, right? So other than go to Shania Twain, what else is happening?
Lots. We're having, the core of any academic conference is people talking to other folks about their research, right? They do that in sessions, which some of them have proposed special sessions that are thematically organized, whether it's about geomatics or urban issues or the environment, or in Carissa's case, Stories Trees Tell Us, which is a great session title. But in many ways, the goal here is to, people give up, they stand up, they give a 10 to 15 minute talk, and then they sit down and listen to others. And then the action really starts, right? When people mix and mingle over coffee, go downtown afterwards, making connections, building networks, and especially for students and graduate students from across the country who represent over half of those folks who are coming in, right? So this is a huge opportunity for them to get professionalization, build their networks, and to decide, which kind of geographer they want to be and where they might want to pursue those interests.
You're listening to The Signal. We are talking all about geography, and like I've been saying through the show, it's not about memorizing maps and capitals anymore. There's a lot going on when it comes to the study of geography, especially here in Memorial University for Newfoundland and Labrador. It's about researching big concepts like what is the extent of human impact on Earth. As you're listening to this show, if you've got thoughts for us, email us, thesignal@cbc.ca, or text us, 709-327-8206. Janelle Skierd is on the line, Director of Industry and Innovation at CNA. Hi, Janelle.
Hey, how are you?
Good. So tell us, where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up in a small town in central Newfoundland called Millertown. It's the wildlife capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. I, I grew up in a mining region and a mining family. So I really think looking back, I'm not sure there was any way that I wouldn't have fallen in love with geography. I think I was just always fated to become a geographer.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, right? Because we were chatting in the lead up to the show, and you mentioned growing up and just the mining side of it. When did you make the decision then to kind of go further or go into geography as you were growing up, going into university and doing your master's?
Yeah, so my father's work was always tied to the natural resource world. So I really gained an appreciation of not only natural resources, but the social and economic impact associated with their extraction. And so if you know anything about Newfoundland and Labrador geography, you would know that Millertown is close to Buckens, which is where I went to school, and that's a historic mining district. So in high school, I actually kind of selfishly took the geography course instead of history because I just did want to write essays. But yeah, so that's really what motivated and inspired me to study economic geography and to write my first thesis on Buckens and the socioeconomic impacts of mine operation and closure. And I know Ern very well because I studied under him for that one.
Right. So, yeah, there's a connection just right here in the studio with Ern, who studied under. The fact that you've moved down the road to your current position, right, Director of Industry and Innovation at College of the North Atlantic, it just feels kind of like you were destined to move into this. If you're like when we look back at everything you're just talking about, and I know you're also doing a PhD right now, but like how much were those earlier days of growing up and then deciding to go into geography? Like, what were those building blocks like for you to get into this position that you're in now with CNA?
It was instrumental, and I think it was just kismet that I ended up where I am. So after I finished my master's in geography, I went on to work with an organization that was focused on resource development. So that tied in really nicely. But then I took a position in the Faculty of Medicine at Memorial University. And this is where I took a bit of a left turn. I decided to do a graduate degree in medical ethics and health ethics. And that was while I was working. But I think this is really where I saw the impact and the value of my geography degree. And I became very interested in the genetic architecture of the province. So most people might not realize that Newfoundland and Labrador is home to a founder population, which in a nutshell is a concept in genetics where the population is derived from the initial founders, and it basically just means that we share similar genetic traits and profiles. So while it's valuable for research, it also means that there's an overrepresentation of certain ailments, and that has healthcare implications. But when I was looking at this, all I could really wonder about and think about was how it blended into geography. And I think most people wouldn't see bioethics and geography as the most natural of bedfellows. But as I listened to researchers and experts talk about our genetic architecture, which I've kind of informally dubbed the Newfoundland genome, I noticed that their language really mirrored the way that we as geographers talk about traditional natural resources. And that is a language that resonates exceptionally well with Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So, terms like genetic gold mine or data is the new oil. So I started to ask myself, can we consider the Newfoundland genome like a natural resource? And then if so, what could it mean for the province economically? And that's really where the PhD came from.
Wow. And you're giving a lot of credit to geography here.
I give almost all the credit to geography.
For what you've been studying, your thoughts then on, because there's a lot for you in real world implications, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I think it ties back to my current role first and foremost. I really use geography daily. I think it's so naturally embedded in everything that I do. So as the Director of Industry Innovation at CNA, I just know that the college system is so very in tune with industry needs. And that goes back to the industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think mining is a great example of that. So the college requires a certain level of responsiveness and reflexivity to changing provincial dynamics. And we really need to incorporate the rural and regional nuances that geography emphasizes. So I think out of 17 campuses across the province, the vast majority are in rural locations. And at one point, all but one campus was within a 100-kilometer radius to mining or mineral operations.
Before I let you go, any final thoughts or do you want to say anything to Ern, who's just sitting here smiling?
It's funny because I actually talk to Ern somewhat regularly now. We still do a bit of work together.
Yeah.
But I guess I've just always considered myself a pracademic. I mean, for me, there has to be something tangible at the end of the day. And I think that geography so organically underpins everything that we do. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's wonderfully all-encompassing. I mean, you think about human dynamics and how we interact with our environments and with outside environments, with each other. There are those circles. I mean, sometimes the vicious circles, linkages. I mean, they're countless. But I think that what it all comes back to are two key elements of geography, and that's space and place.
Janelle, thanks so much for this.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
You too. Janelle Skierd there, Director of Industry and Innovation at CNA. You are listening to The Signal. Here with me in the studio, we've got a bunch of geographers. Ern Keing, Mahar Masudi, Carissa Brown, Yolande Potty-Sherman. The questions for today, right? What do geographers do? And what does a geographic education matter in today's world? 1 second there. I think you got it. All right. Those are the two questions that we're asking. A lot there in what was just said, right? Any thoughts from anyone here in the studio?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hi, Janelle. It was really great to hear from you. I think Janelle just demonstrated exactly why graduates of geography are so appealing out in the work world and out for problem solving, because our graduates do really think, or geographers in general, really do think about the big picture of a problem or an issue or a pattern that we're seeing or a response that we're seeing. So not only kind of what data do we need to answer this question, how are we going to analyze it, but also who is affected, whose lands is that occurring on, and what are their values? Why is this occurring in this place at this time? So it's really thinking about all of those interacting factors that Yolande and Ern have both mentioned already too.
What for the conference that's happening? What are you going to be talking about?
Trees telling stories.
Can you tell me just a bit? I'm just curious about it because Ern mentioned it earlier. I was like, wait, I need to ask a question about this.
Yeah, so I put out a call for geographers to contribute to a very open-ended session called Stories Trees Tell Us. And I said, take that title as you will. And so we have some poets coming to tell stories through poetry about the cultural value of certain tree species on their lands. We have someone talking about the fires in central Newfoundland and how severe they were and what do we know about them. That's Lucas Berho at Canadian Forest Service in Corner Brook. We have myself, who is going to be talking about a little shipwreck that folks in Cape Ray are quite interested in. So the wood from that shipwreck can tell us a story of where those trees grew, when they grew. Please don't ask me for an answer right now.
No, it's okay.
Ongoing progress. But wood and trees can tell us a lot of things about the history of that place and the environment and the conditions it grew in.
This isn't specific, like you said, but why can wood tell us those types of stories?
Well, wood records the conditions that it experienced as it grew. And so if you can picture, you cut down a tree and you get these concentric rings of growth. That's called a tree cookie in my world.
A tree cookie.
A tree cookie, not recommended for eating, but that's what we call them.
Yeah.
So each of those years that it grew, if it was a very cold year, the kind of year where our tomatoes don't grow, if we even try, because we are always optimistic that we can grow tomatoes, we might have a really narrow growth ring on that tree. That tells us that something that was going on, that the tree wasn't very happy. But then maybe there's a few years where it's really warm, it's nice, we're getting a whole string of these hot, warm days. The tree can grow a lot. It can acquire a lot of nutrients, it can grow a lot. So that pattern of narrow years of growth and wide ones, we can match that growth pattern to what we call tree chronologies that are kind of put together in databases. We can take that pattern, slide it along known tree growth dates, and figure out when that tree grew. So, for example, if you were trying to date a shipwreck, you could look across those tree rings for that pattern. And the shipwreck does indeed have a pretty interesting pattern that I'm hoping I can match pretty soon.
That's really cool.
Stay tuned. To figure out when the trees grew, when they were cut down. And so we know then that the ship would have been built after that date.
Yeah, so it could be around for ships or perhaps Viking settlements or you name it. It's all there. If there's wood that was used, folks can go and be like, hey, here's the rough estimate on when this was, and which then you're just kind of connecting dots or I guess kind of figuring out a jigsaw puzzle.
And I think a neat part about that story is I am not an archaeologist.
Yeah.
I study trees that grow outside right now and how they burn in a forest fire or what comes after a forest fire. But because I'm in geography, I have all of these colleagues here and in other departments that I can go to say, hey, I know how to do this part. What do we know about maritime history? And then Ern says, don't ask me, but I know this person over here that knows a lot about maritime history. And then through these connections, because we have these conversations, because we're such a diverse discipline, it means that we can really tackle problems like that more easily.
Yeah, it's a good example because, again, so why is someone with degrees in biology in the same department as someone like myself with 2 degrees in history and then a PhD in geography? Well, I see dendrochronology and I say that tree's an archive. Well, I'm trained in historical geography. I'm trained to think about the past and to think about archives and what they capture, what they don't, what they leave out, the stories we can tell with those kinds of fragments of time, however they come to us, whether they're human generated or non-human generated. Again, another example of again, conversations that Carissa and I can have is I just had a student complete a wonderful PhD thesis on the history of wildfire management in the boreal forest of northern Saskatchewan and the politics of that and how it affected Indigenous communities and the treaty rights of those communities and the ways in which colonialism in many ways continues to shape the everyday lived experience of wildfires, evacuation, firefighting, et cetera, in the boreal forest. Well, who do I turn to when I need fire expertise? And who, in fact, participated in examining the student's thesis? Carissa, because she brings all this expertise in understanding forest dynamics, understanding forest and fire ecology, and we have this wonderful interdisciplinary conversation about it.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I know we're looking back there, but then it informs where we're going, and especially if you know, nowadays, climate change
100%.
And the more frequency of wildfires for everything else.
And then just staying on the topic of trees, then as an urban geographer, you might be interested in understanding, like, where are the trees and how does that map onto other patterns of inequality, right? And that's what our colleague Mahar is working on as well. Like, where is the urban canopy, and he can use GIS techniques to be able to understand that and visualize that on a broad scale.
Tell us a bit more about the Urban Ecology and Analytics Lab for some of the work that's being done.
Sure, yeah. So in urban ecology, basically what we do as urban ecologists is that we apply a kind of like sort of a transdisciplinary framework to understand cities. So what it means is that, let's say, for example, in my research, I focus on enhancing the environmental conditions of cities. So one example is that we know that vegetation provides us with many services, many benefits. So we refer to these services as ecosystem services, like temperature reduction through providing like evapotranspiration or like shading, basically shading from the sunlight.
In a city, lots of concrete. The more trees you have, the less hot or cooler, cooler it could be because of that canopy, right? Exactly. That's the thing. Or air pollution. We know that, again, urban trees, urban forests, they can basically also intercept, those air pollutants. So purifying air, even like a noise barrier in the city. So they can basically provide us with lots of benefits, or like Carissa also mentioned, like cultural benefits, social values as well. But the thing is, so first we need to understand, and also we know that like the more vegetation, as you mentioned, so the higher the level of ecosystem services. And also we know that the spatial distribution, the spatial pattern of these urban forests also important, like how connected they are, how close they are in relation to one another, how fragmented they are. So what is like the shape complexity of these different patches. So all of these are important. But the thing is, when we study cities are really complex systems in the sense that for us, to understand
why, for example, we have like these vegetation or certain species here. In a natural ecosystem, usually we consider factors like temperature, elevation, humidity, these factors, background climate. But in a city, not only are these natural processes and drivers important, but also social processes like human decisions. Because where these different parks or vegetation are also the result of human decisions, like the policymakers, municipalities, urban planners, designers, all of these as well. So that's why in urban ecology, we kind of apply this framework to understand how these natural and social processes interact with each other to kind of cause the patterns that we see in the city. And that can be applied to everything, the buildings, the density of them, the land uses, different distribution of land uses like residential, commercial, all of these across the city, from natural to built and human infrastructure.
Yeah, everything down to the politics of a splash pad.
Right. Yep.
All right, folks, you're listening to The Signal. We got a bunch of geography stands here today. We're going to go to another one of them. Pierce Evans is on the line. How you doing? Good. So Pierce has been on the show before, NL Program Director, Nature Conservancy of Canada. Talk to us about how your experience with geography and how it's connected to where you are now with the Nature Conservancy of Canada.
Yeah, well, I mean, I stood no chance, really. My mother is an urban planner and my father is an economist. So, I was kind of built for the department, really, and the discipline. The course that was mentioned earlier, the Geography 1050, was that was the gateway. I took that course, and we were having conversations in that course that were the same conversations that I had growing up around the dinner table. So it was a pretty natural fit. I could definitely kind of appreciate a lot of what Janelle was talking about.
So what were some of these conversations then?
Well, I mean, how kind of political systems and land use planning decisions kind of interact, how communities are structured. It was a little bit more sort of urban geography oriented. So I was able to sort of resist that a little bit in my training, because I ended up in Carissa's lab studying biogeography and studying the kind of the different factors that impact or could impact how southern tree species aren't very common across Newfoundland would potentially shape how they could spread across Newfoundland as the climate warms and climate restrictions on where tree species grow start to sort of maybe deteriorate or change. So that kind of ecological background to the research I did in Carissa's lab really helps to kind of gave me a very good sort of provincial overview of what kind of ecosystems occur where in the province. And that's really important when you're in a position like mine and with an organization like the Nature Conservancy of Canada, where we're focused on conservation issues. But the other element of conservation is really it's land use planning. It's, how humans are interacting with or not interacting with, where they're choosing not to interact with a landscape in order to, or, change how they're interacting with a landscape so that it is able to kind of preserve all of those important ecological functions. And we're kind of saying, all right, we're recognizing the uniqueness or the specialness of this place. And so we're going to plan our activities in such a way that those, that uniqueness is able to continue to thrive there and into the future.
Tell folks about what's on the go with the Nature Conservancy of Canada for the NL side of things for this summer and into the fall. If you got an extra minute.
Well, we're looking at a few different opportunities to expand our own sort of nature reserves, both on the East Coast, on the Salmonier River, and on the West Coast, in the kind of Stephenville Crossing area. And we are we continue to be focused on kind of supporting the efforts of the Halibu First Nation and their drive to protect Charlie's Place in central Newfoundland. And that's an area kind of between the northwest and southwest Gander Rivers near Gander Lake. that they have recognized as a culturally significant and ecologically significant area. That's still a big focus of our work, and we are still looking at protecting, working with the provincial government and other partners to protect a significant portion of the Upper Humber River watershed, which is a really important Atlantic salmon spawning area, and I believe also a caribou calving area. It's a significant caribou area according to the provincial mapping. So, we've got a lot of projects, big and small, on the go that we're working on.
Excellent. Thanks for coming back on the show. I appreciate the update on what you're up to as well. Much appreciated.
Thank you. See you now.
Pierce Evans there, graduate of the Department for Geography at Memorial University and also NL Program Director at Nature Conservancy of Canada. And I'll go back to a couple of my guests here in studio. Carissa or Ern, when it comes to listen to a former student, but then someone who's in the positions who we've just already heard from today, what's that like for when you're a prof and you're like, hey, this person was a student, great student, but also doing this now?
It's awesome. It honestly couldn't be more rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't speak for Ern. My kind of drive in this job is to be able to help folks along in that process. So when it's successful, like Piers and Janelle and many other of our graduates who honestly have such a diversity of employment across the province, across in Nunatsiavut, across Canada, internationally, that's so exciting. I get a lot of joy in my job from seeing where people go next.
Yeah, I find it interesting to see it, and then especially when they're kind of attached to where public policy is being pushed, right? So that's fascinating to me to see someone. It's like, oh, when they were a student, now, oh wow, this is someone who whoever, just as any example, but just to be able to see that they're having an impact that way, I find it to be fascinating.
And I think you see that a lot. One of the challenges, again, with a little bit of the branding issue or what have you, is that there's not a lot of, you don't open the newspaper or the job section and say geographer wanted that often. But the skills, the knowledge, the expertise, the methods, et cetera, are widely applicable in everything from urban planning to ecology. The student that I just mentioned who did his thesis on wildfire is now working for NRCan as a wildfire social scientist, because folks now recognize that, we don't just manage wildfires from an ecological perspective, but people and communities and places and are all super important as well. So we find our students find employment very much at that interface of research and expertise, but also public policy and community. And I think that also reflects a lot of the kind of research culture that we have at the department, which is that we're deeply concerned with scientific problems in that very generic sense of the word science, but we're also very much concerned with how that impacts the real world or is in many ways questions that are driven by community partners themselves. And so we try and find ways to connect with the real world problems and concerns of communities in the north, communities in rural Newfoundland, or even indeed communities around the world. If you think about our research on migration, for instance.
Yeah, how it worked, how it works, how it hopefully will work or could work, depending, and you're tying all that together from figuring everything out from, how old wood can be for ships and where that was, to talk about urban forests and urban planning and everything, including splash pads. I don't know why I used that example again, but anyways.
Yeah, just in the last week, I've heard of 2 students getting jobs, one in heritage planning for the city of Ottawa, and one in a small town in the Yukon doing economic and development projects, housing development. So just the applications are vast, and the jobs, as you say, don't have geographer in the title necessarily. But because we are so focused on doing some element of human or ecosystem well-being, I mean, these are the skills that are in demand, right, in today's world.
So what's loaded into the pipe then for what can we expect coming from the department, whether it's from new positions or new fields of study or research that's being done to be excited about? We've already heard some of it with the teaser already today, but anything else that you're all working on?
Oh, maybe the new certificate. As also all of my colleagues mentioned, so in geography, basically, we are interested to understand where things are. And then we ask questions about why things are where they are. So, and that's kind of like points to the importance of GIS, geomatics, remote sensing, and related fields. So geomatics essentially is about the science and technology of collecting and managing, analyzing, and communicating spatial information, spatial data, geographic data. And when we say spatial data, we are basically talking about data that has coordinates, like X and Y, Z for the elevation and T for time. So to understand where things happen, and when they happen and why they happen. And GIS is kind of like a science and technique and software and knowledge that can help us understand things, to map things. Like, as also Ern mentioned earlier, so like from when we get up in the morning in our homes, so there is like our homes basically are somewhere on the map, or when we want to get to the work, we basically use the navigation system to get to the work, which is based on like GIS. So GIS facilitates the kind of like overlay of multiple data layers, like the road network, population density, all of these different data layers, and analyzing them to understand, and to find kind of the optimal path to the route. Or you can use GIS, to understand, where crime events are happening, and then why they are happening, where they happen. To understand all of these questions, we can use like GIS and remote sensing, or remote sensing, for example, for like to get the satellite images and then to understand and process satellite images to understand, again, where things are, like to understand deforestation, to study the urban growth, the patterns of urban growth, or to natural disasters like wildfires, to understand where they are happening, to help, for example, for natural disaster management, crisis management, all of these. So there is like a really wide application for geomatics, GIS, remote sensing, cartography, and related fields. And in the geography department, we are also offering like GIS and remote sensing courses with also my other colleague in the geomatics concentration, Dr. Benjamin Misiuk, who is teaching like the remote sensing courses, and also I teach like some GIS courses. So specifically, we are offering 3 GIS courses from the basics level to really advanced levels. In the advanced level, for example, we are teaching like really sophisticated methods for analyzing all of these different information, different data from the social aspect of geography to physical aspect of geography. Also using like emerging technologies as well, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning algorithms, and the application of all of these to understand the spatial data better. And there is also really great opportunity for students who are interested to take these GIS and remote sensing courses, because by taking these courses and also 3 other electives from other departments, now they can earn a new certificate that is going to be available from next fall, fall 2025. So with the name of Geomatics and Environment. So they can earn also this certificate by taking these courses as well.
Yeah, and if you graduate out into today's world, right, with and also with a booming tech industry here, I can easily see how that could be applicable, right? And so this is everything from like you said, so map-wise, if I want to get in my car to like plan out a route, but then all of a sudden we're inserting, well, maybe it's a holiday, maybe the traffic is not as big on the so all that input gets put into it along with weather or whatever else, or it could be like you said about forest fires for mapping or ice charts. Like it's these are the types of things you're looking at with all these different, and even also AI inputs to for figuring stuff out, which is like obviously really important these days.
Exactly. Like you can specialize in GIS or remote sensing itself and become a GIS or a remote sensing analyst, or you can just use GIS and remote sensing as application to other fields. Like you can work in a crime analyst department, or you can work like, let's say, market research. You want to understand, based on data on population or demographics or road network, transportation, climate data. So you want to understand, which cities or which neighborhoods are better, for expansion of your business. So you can, again, collect all of these data, overlay them in a GIS, and then analyze them to understand, those. Or let's say, for example, in a public policy or in a municipality, you're interested in understanding where is the best location for building a new school or a new childcare facility. So again, you can just overlay these different layers of data based on your understanding of what data is important to, let's say, relating to your research question, to your question that you're trying to solve. And then you can, again, understand what is kind of the most suitable location for these new construction. You can just apply to many things. And I think that's what is really fascinating about GIS, because also there is a famous quote that says, everything that happens somewhere. And I think that kind of like includes everything.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess as a geographer, I guess you need GIS. Even as a non-geographer, I guess it's good to know GIS and remote sensing.
All right.
Yeah, I had a really funny experience where I got a phone call on my office phone. Somebody from Walmart called me up to ask me. They were because I study immigration and migration patterns, especially in North American cities. And this buyer from Walmart was using my research to figure out where to target certain kinds of foods to certain kinds of immigrant communities. And so they'd been like reading my paper. They were like, I just read your paper. It was extremely helpful. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is such a funny phone call.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was just cool, like just totally out of the blue. So I think, you don't even realize like how far your research goes. But I think in our department, we have such strong research. If you look at some of the research dollars we bring into the university, in some years, we've actually been ranked 4th for the whole university, just our department alone. And I think we have like 13 or 14 faculty now. So we are, we're all doing cutting edge research in some way or another, whether that's, world e-waste, like global food governance, climate change, tree lines, immigration, healthy oceans, fisheries, all of that. There's always something exciting going on, and some exciting way for a student to get involved in that research too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that example you gave, right? Because, of course, if you look at where folks are moving, migrating to certain diaspora and higher populations, and then if you're trying to sell stuff, totally. Certain things, like you just look at St. John's, because I live in St. John's, look at some of the expansion of different types of foods that have been brought in recent years and how they're connected to some of the communities that have been growing here. You can see it. But then if someone's already mapping stuff out and you're one of the sellers, of course they will want to read those papers.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. You're like, are you serious? Hold on, I need to record this call.
Yeah.
Aaron, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's not only the urban development of St. John's, but we have a longstanding tradition of supporting rural and regional economic development and location decision making, going back to using some of those GIS tools. And we're so fortunate, in the context. It's not a secret that Memorial has run into lots of financial struggles over recent years.
There's been a news story or two, yeah.
And but we've had the really, really good fortune in the last couple of years of beginning to that process of renewal. So we probably half our faculty now were hired within the last 5 or 10 years, including our new GIS colleagues after the departure and retirement of other colleagues. And it was looking like, oh no, are we going to be able to really replace these super vital elements of what geography is and does? Fortunately, we have, but they also chart new research directions. So the urban ecology piece that Mahar was talking about, the seabed mapping work of Dr. Misyuk, these are new and really important and vital areas, but they also tap into that tradition of very applied, very relevant, very provincially relevant and locally relevant research that can be, whether Walmart uses it or a town planner in Clarenville, or the Ministry of Rural and Regional Economic Development. They'll all find something interesting and compelling about that research.
Yeah, and to use actual information, not truthiness. It's like, no, we're using stats and info to make some decisions, and that's a pretty darn good thing. We've got so we have to end 5 minutes early today for a Paris 2024 update. Any last 15-second thoughts for anyone?
I think one last thing that we're all excited about in the fall is the courses that we're teaching for our undergrad. So one of my very favorite things to do is to drag a busload of students out to a bog, and I see their faces, and I know that they don't want to go, but they have to for this course, Biogeography 3140. And when we leave that bog, everybody is laughing. Everybody has made a memory that they're going to have for a while because someone fell in, because someone always does. Those are the best times as a geography instructor, is having those moments with students that are those memory makers that they're going to take after their degree. So I'm excited about that.
All right. Good luck in the bog, everyone. And thanks all of you for this discussion today. We're out of time. My timing's all off because we're finishing 5 minutes early. We're going to go to that Paris 2024 update. Tomorrow, Gardening Day. Andrew Hawthorne is in for me. Michael Murray is the gardening guest. Reason being, Twillingate, you're on notice. We'll be live at Captain Dave's on Wednesday. You heard it. And then Thursday in Lewisport. We'll be in town. Those details to follow. But if you see us, say hi, and thanks for listening.